Welcome everyone for coming. Welcome for coming. Thank you for clicking the link to be here. Thank you for your support and generosity. My name is Isabelle Platt. I'm one of the hosts. I'm not going to be like singing or dancing for you. Being one of the hosts of this event just means that we're responsible for choosing the wonderful candidates here tonight and for getting out the word about this event. And I heard about Run for Something through my sister, who heard about it through her ex-coworker, Rafi. And I was so excited he brought this to our attention. I'm not a very political person. Like, I wore a shirt with like Obama on it in 2007. But basically that just means that like, I didn't really take the time to look at any other candidates unless it was the presidential candidate. And then Corona happened, and before that, Trump got elected, and then there were the murders of George Floyd and Breonna Taylor, and I just really began to like interrogate my role in this country, my whiteness, my privilege, and I had like this whole mindset change where I was like, what is the point of living here in America if I'm not going to be involved in bettering it, and if I don't take my voting power seriously? So I'm very lucky because my good friend Hannah had been more politically active than I ever was. She phone banked a lot and was part of a climate strike group, and she invited me to start phone banking for a congressional candidate in the Bronx. And basically she just made it like really easy for me to feel like I could be more involved. And it all felt very accessible because she was doing it and I knew her. So that's what Rafi did for my sister and me, and hopefully that's what the hosts of tonight are doing for all of you who signed up. And I think that it's just such a gift to have friends who want to introduce you to easy ways to be more involved in improving this country. So I hope you feel honored to be a part of this, and it's important to remember that sharing what you're doing with your friends is a huge gift to them. So I'm going to introduce the next speaker, Amanda Litman. Amanda Litman is the co-founder and executive director of Run for Something, a political action committee that helps recruit and support young, diverse progressives running for down the ballot office. Previously, she was the email director for Hillary Clinton's 2016 presidential campaign, digital director for Charlie Crist's 2014 Florida gubernatorial campaign, deputy email director for Organizing for Action, and an email writer for Barack Obama's 2012 re-election campaign. She graduated from Northwestern University in 2012 with a BA in American Studies, and she lives in Brooklyn with her rescue dog, Sadie.
Thank you so much, Isabelle. I'm really glad you mentioned Sadie because I'm sure she's going to be barking or growling or sneezing in the background, and I hope you just bear with me. I am so thrilled about tonight's event. First, as you're joining, if you're here, make sure to introduce yourself in the chat. If you change your settings to all panelists and attendees so everyone can see, let us know where you are. If you are new to Run for Something, if you have any questions throughout the evening, either for me or more importantly for any of our panelists tonight, drop them into the chat or the Q&A function more importantly. I will pull from that as we get to the Q&A section. I want to thank our host committee for pulling together tonight's event. The host committee includes Isabelle, Rafi Ruthchild, Amanda Verdon, Sinead Daly, Lauren Platt, Allie Moore, Vicky Elenowitz, Taylor Salditch, Ted Teros, Heidi Sieck, Jeannie, Cambria, Mitch, Draizin, Sourav, Bhowmick, and Andrew Russell. It's so great to see many people I know, but more importantly, many people I don't who are new to Run for Something. So I want to do very quickly a little overview of what Run for Something does and what we're focusing on this year. And then I want to get into the meat of today, which is New York City 101. I made a little chart. We're going to talk through sort of how government works in New York State and New York City and how these offices play a role in our day-to-day lives. And then the real stars will introduce you to some of our candidates and alumni, and you can get to ask any questions. As Isabelle mentioned, Run for Something was born out of the 2016 campaign. We launched on Inauguration Day in 2017, along with my co-founder, Ross Morales-Ricchetto. We thought the organization would be small. We'd get maybe 100 people in the first year. Instead, 1,000 people signed up in the first week. And as of today, we're up to more than 60,000 young people all across the country who have said they want to run for office. So what was going to be my sort of like side hustle is now a full-time multi-million-dollar 16 staffed organization that is working with more than 1,500 candidates across the country. This year alone, we have endorsed more than 600. I expect we'll have more than 500 on the ballot in November. Our 2020 endorsement class is about 60% Black, Indigenous, people of color, about 55% women, about 22% LGBTQ, and it's located in all 50 states. It is incredible, the people that we are working with, and you're gonna get to talk to a few of them tonight. Our focus for this year was a couple things. First, making sure we're continuing to recruit people. So a fun fact, in the last 5 months since May, 4 months since May, we've recruited more than 20,000 people who want to run. That's a third of our total recruitment class have come in the last couple months. That's telling you that the momentum is here and that we are driving towards something bigger. It also tells you that we can't go away after Election Day, because most of the people who signed up with us want to run in 2021, 2022, and beyond. Our second big priority this year was focusing on state legislative races, in no small part because of the redistricting that will occur in 2021 after the census is done this year. We want to make sure that we're building sustainable power for Democrats, that when Democrats win state legislatures, they can redraw the maps to be in our favor, or at least more fair, and they can combat the voter suppression happening on the Republican side to ensure that we are building power that can last. The third thing that we're focusing on this year is making sure that campaigns are surviving during the pandemic. We launched resourcesforcampaigns.com in March, week 2, I believe, of quarantine, so almost 6 months ago. We've had more than 20,000 visitors to the website. All summer long, we've been running a master class called Armchair Chats. We've had one just earlier tonight. Tonight's made more than 1 million viewers to our Armchair Chats. We have one more next week. These are free classes on campaign tactics. Our regional staff have been working directly with campaigns all across the country to make sure they're getting the resources they need and that they're able to find new ways to campaign when we can't knock doors. So as I said, we're going to have more than 500 candidates on the ballot this November. Still a couple more primaries next week. These things don't end, and then we'll have some final numbers for you. But I am really optimistic about what's going to happen. I don't know about the White House. I don't have any predictions, and I'm not in the gambling game anymore. But I think on the local level, we are going to win some amazing races because we're fielding incredible candidates. And it matters. It really, really matters. I think that's something that both the pandemic and the protests from the last 6 months have shown us, is that who runs and who wins in these local offices is critically important. It is not just about Congress. It is not just about the White House. It is who is determining police budgets, who is determining voting laws, who is determining school funding, who is determining whether schools are even open in the first place. The answer is not Congress. The answer is not the White House. The answer is our city councils, our school boards, our state legislatures. With that, one of the reasons we've been doing these events, and we did this in LA with many of the same people in this host committee, is because a lot of people, understandably, do not have a good sense of how local government is structured. And it is quite okay. It is intentionally confusing. The people who wrote these rules wanted to keep normal people out. It was meant to be an elitist process. It wasn't really meant to be of the people. So the structure doesn't feel necessarily intuitive. To that end, I draw it out, because I really do think this is important to level set so that we understand how these different roles play before you get to talk to candidates who are running for these offices. So in New York State in particular is a really special snowflake here. So we got New York City. We got a mayor. I don't know, we got a mayor. Remember mayor? I got feelings about the mayor, but we have a mayor, we have a public advocate, we have a comptroller, we have a city council. That's sort of our executive and our legislative branch. I think it's important to note this because next year's city council elections in 2021 are going to be batshit crazy. If you haven't started seeing this already, 2/3 of the seats are open seats. Of the 51 members, 2/3 are not running again. They expect more than 500 or 600 candidates to run for these offices. They're incredibly important, not just around things like city laws and governing, but really around land use, around building zoning, around whether or not right now our restaurants are open, our businesses are able to function. It is incredibly important who wins these city council seats. Under discussed, but really important part of New York City government, let's see, can I do this? Community boards. Community boards. I love community boards. A fun fact, I applied to be on our community board and got rejected, which I still am very upset about. Community boards are based in the neighborhood. They advise the city council on neighborhood issues. It's really peak New York City politics to attend a community board meeting, listen in on the conversation, and engage in what's going on. If you've never been to one, most of the meetings right now are virtual. It is worth attending, if only to see people screaming at each other about parking. That's your cup of tea. I wanted to articulate this and how this government is structured, because it is in fact not as powerful as you would think. And I know Senator Alessandra Biaggi and Amanda Septimo can hit on this. One of the big issues in New York is what we would call home rule, which I would have in green. It has some sick frowny faces, but also maybe some smiley faces, depending on your perspective. New York has a really particular framing in that the Albany, so the state legislature, of which Alessandra and Amanda are either a part of or imminently a part of, has a lot of oversight over New York City laws in ways that you might not expect. Things like cameras in speed zones, school oversight. I'm sure Alessandra could name some other things, but there is more that happens in Albany that actually affects only the city, or primarily the city, than you would think. So as you're thinking about the elections that you really care about, you're like, why should I give a shit who my state senator or my state representative is? They're all Democrats are now in control. Why should it matter? It's because which Democrat is in there matters, and which Democrats from New York City are really important. And I know I would love for Alessandra and Amanda to talk about that a little bit. Just to like cover the bases here, we also have New York State. We got a governor, we got a lieutenant governor, an AG, Tish James, she rules. We have the state legislature. For those who are not as familiar with what happened in 2018, up until then, Republicans controlled the state legislature, the state Senate, because a caucus of Democrats chose to identify with them. It's sort of a complicated way of saying there were a couple of Democrats decided to hang out with Republicans and give them power. This group of Democrats who did so was called the IDC. They were mostly from the city. Alessandra beat one of their leaders, as well as 4 other run for something candidates who beat their members, and ensured that Democrats could actually take control of the chamber, and since then has done incredible work. The only other thing I would mention as part of the sort of New York City, New York State government is the court system, which I know Judge Karen will talk a little bit about. It is a very distinct, it's not like San Francisco where you have or other states where you might have like the county necessarily, or the city or the state. It's really run through the state system. There isn't like a New York City court system that is wholly separate. That was a very complicated way of saying that our state government, like every other state, is its own special snowflake. And if you don't understand it, it's okay. I want to be really clear here that it is okay if it feels complicated. And one of the goals of tonight's conversation is to really ask the dumb questions. Ask the dumb questions, because we want to make sure that you understand it so that you can know how to participate in it. With that sort of rambling mess, I want to introduce our first candidate for tonight, Judge Karen Best. Administrative Law Judge Karen Best is a former public defender and a current public servant. She started her legal career in law school, representing criminal defense in Nassau County District Court. She later joined the Legal Aid Society of Westchester County. She worked fearlessly for the rights of Yonkers residents in Yonkers City Court. She advocated for her clients by challenging the Westchester County DA's office to be fair and just. She is now an administrative law judge for the New York State Department of Motor Vehicles. She serves as the VP of the Board of Directors of the Legal Aid Society of Westchester County, and she is now running in the Democratic primary because she wants to serve as the next Yonkers City Court judge. I'm really excited to have her here tonight to tell a little bit about her campaign and her story, and for us to get to ask her all kinds of questions.
Hi, thank you for having me. Well, just as an update, I'm one of the 3 nominees for Yonkers City Court Judge in the Democratic general election, the general election. So I won the primary, and I did it without the local party support. And, and that is such a huge accomplishment, because when you think about a primary, you think about the Senate, the Assembly, maybe the mayor, city council, but you don't think about judges, and you don't realize how important judges are until you either have to be in front of one, or maybe the president is nominating one for the Supreme Court, and you're like, uh-oh, this is important. So it starts on the local level, because someone like me, who is now an administrative judge, can move up to a local court, then go to Supreme or family or another court, and then federal court, and then end up a nominee for the Supreme Court. So it's important to pay attention to all the parts of government, because it could end up affecting your life or someone else's. For example, bail reform. That's a huge issue this year, and people are focusing on, the Senate, but the judges are also an important component of it, because I'm going to also be a part of criminal court, and I'm the one that's going to be making the decisions. So I have to follow the laws that are instated by the other part of government. So that's why I'm saying it's very important to also think about judicial races. My race was important because Yonkers is notorious for people having to wait their turn and being very selective. And I was told to wait my turn, and I said no. And during the pandemic, I stayed inside most of the time because I live in an apartment building, and I didn't want my neighbors who were seniors to get sick because I went out campaigning and I caught COVID, and then I spread it, whether knowingly or unknowingly, because you could be asymptomatic. But what I did was, with my campaign, I used the fact that I was the youngest one running, and I used social media. I used email. I bought an email list, and I reached out to voters in a different way. And the one thing I heard from voters, like the biggest complaint, was that their mailbox was completely full with mailers from candidates. So I found a way to stand out. Also, what I did was I wrote letters to like the local bloggers, to voters, and I turned those letters into part of my lit drop. So what I did was I attached them to my palm cards. And since I didn't want to knock on doors and speak to people, the letter was there for them to read why I was running. So it was easy for them to kind of have a conversation with me without having an in-person conversation. So when a lot of voters went to the polls, they said, I got your letter. I'm going to vote for you. So it was important for me to do it my way. And out of a 5-person race, because there was 5 people running, there were 3 seats. One incumbent who's been there for 20 years, he did not win. There was one person appointed by the mayor. He did not win. And I came in second. I had probably less than maybe 5% over the main person that was endorsed. So that just goes to show and my tagline was believe in best, because in order to be successful, you have to believe in yourself first, and then everyone else will believe in you afterwards. And that's exactly what happened. So I want my story to inspire anyone, not just anyone in Yonkers, anyone. If you want to do something, go out and do it.
Amazing. I love how strategically you campaigned and how clearly effective it was. If you have questions for Karen, make sure to drop them into the Q&A. I would next want to introduce one of my favorite other Amandas in politics. Amanda Septimo is a lifelong Bronx resident running for state assembly because she knows that her community needs leaders who will work to end the cycles of poverty and the lack of opportunity that plagued the community for decades. Her journey in public service began in her teens doing work with environmental justice advocates. She continued in her time working for Congress, and now is running for office today. She was led to run for state assembly because she knows that true progress begins with real leadership. I love her story, and I am so excited for Amanda to be joining us today. Take it away.
Thank you so much to my other favorite Amanda in politics. Though I saw someone in the chat saying they were really here to network with another Amanda who's here. So hello to that Amanda as well. It's a great club. So my name is Amanda Septimo. I'm running for state assembly in the South Bronx in the 84th Assembly District. And this is actually my second go round. I ran for this same seat in 2018 and suffered the biggest heartbreak of my life. And I'm a Mets fan. So you know that means it was serious, because heartbreak is a very normal part of my life. But it was an incredible learning experience and allowed us to come back sort of better and stronger. But I think one of the things that I'm most grateful for is the fact that Run for Something has been there throughout. my first endorsement in the cycle of 2018 was from the Working Families Party, but my second was Run for Something. And those were two. So I spent, just going back for a second, I spent 4 years working with Congressman Serrano, who is the congressman for the area that I'm running in, which is my home district. I've lived here my whole life. And you would think that, you know, that lends itself some credibility. But unfortunately, I think the reality of being a young person, being a young woman, and a young woman of color in politics is that you're constantly working to validate your work, your thoughts, and your ability to lead in others' eyes. And so much of politics has been an inside baseball game in New York specifically over these years, that it can be difficult, right? To walk into a room and say, hey, I'm going against an incumbent who's been there almost as long as I've been alive, and here are all the reasons you should take me seriously. And you can do everything you want and you can have a track record, but there's always a subset of people who kind of look at you with skepticism that feels beyond healthy. And I think that I know that when I got endorsed by Working Families and Run for Something so closely, it did a lot to really validate the campaign. And really validate my sense of purpose in the campaign, and my ability to think like, okay, we've got a message, we've got a plan that people are connecting with, that people can see the value in. And that really turned into a campaign that I'm really proud of, even though we didn't win in 2018. I knocked on almost 4,000 doors myself. And really, we have some of the lowest voter turnout in the city. It really was a campaign to encourage people to imagine what's possible politically for them. We are constantly named as the poorest congressional district in the country. We've got the highest asthma rates. We've had the opioid crisis forever. Every crisis that you can name, we're kind of ground zero for it. And I think people in our community have gotten to a place where all of these things feel normalized. We're living in crisis is normal. And in reality, to me, it means that we have a leadership crisis. And having that conversation over and over is difficult, because you run into people who are so dissatisfied with politics that they openly tell you that they're just not voting anymore, because they're just like, there's nothing there for me. People only show up when they need votes. We never see them any other time, and we still don't see any change. And that's something that I had to grant as true, right? Like over and over and over, and say, you know what, you're right, and I'm with you, and I can only promise that I'm going to be different. And if I win or lose, of course, at the time I didn't know I'd lose, but if I win or lose, you'll keep seeing me. And that's really a commitment that we made to people, and that we made sure we kept. And so, you know, it took a while to get over the heartbreak and to be normal again, but just pushing through it and making sure that we were meeting our commitment to people, to say, this is not transactional politics that we've seen. I think all politics has some element of transaction that feels uncomfortable, because it's like, yeah, we had this amazing conversation, I still need your vote. But it's really nice to be able to still continue those conversations outside of that space. And I think the most empowering thing about it for me is really watching people's kind of light return back to their eyes, and like that light bulb moment where you talk through the failing schools, you talk through people's inability to afford rent, through NYCHA buildings falling apart, and people kind of remembering that like none of this is normal, and that when you go to Manhattan, you don't see piles of trash there for days. When you go to Manhattan, when you go to other parts of the city, you don't see these issues plagued. We've just been numb to it, but this is not how things should be. And watching people go through that cycle is really incredible, and watching them being powered is really amazing. And so I'm really grateful to organizations like Run for Something that are always willing to really see the story, hear the story, understand the vision, and understand why these fights matter. Like I mentioned, was running against someone who was in office for almost as long as I've been alive, and who had every bit of establishment behind them that you could think of. And I think of establishment as this like parade of politicians endorsing people, which certainly happens, but there's also this very, very, very insidious element to it that you can't see. It's people not returning your calls, it's organizations not taking meetings, it's all sorts of invisible barriers that you can feel, but you can't quite figure out why things won't come together and why people won't hear you out. And that's why people who do hear you out and who do listen and decide to support you are so, so, so valuable. And so fast forward to 2020, we went again, and we actually were able to win like a landmark court case. So I 100% agree that judges matter. A landmark court case in that we found out that the incumbent was engaging in a fraudulent petition operation, and we took that case all the way up to the Court of Appeals, which is the highest court in the state of New York. And what's interesting about that, and so I just want to harp on the judges for a second, what's interesting about that is that we lost at 2 other levels of court before that. So in the regular Supreme Court, we lost at the appellate division, and the regular Supreme Court we expected to lose because those judges are so appointed and inside baseball that we were like, listen, there's no way a judge is going to throw off an incumbent. For me, it's not going to happen no matter how cut and dry it is. But when we got to the appellate division, that's where we hoped there'd be this level of impartiality. And we were disappointed again. And the Court of Appeals took the case and surprised us. And in their decision said, lower courts should have said this was wrong. And so I can't stress enough that judges matter at every level, because you need people who are willing to just do what's right, irrespective of political costs. And so Karen, I'm really excited for you. And I wish I could vote for you, but I'm sure one day I will. And so we made it through the primary, and now we've got the November election coming up. I am the Democratic nominee, and I'm on the Working Families line as well. And I guess the final thing I'll say, so even now we have the incumbent now running on a third party line. And so fighting our way through November. And I jokingly say to people like, oh, it never ends. But the truth is, like, it never ends, right? Like when and I'm sure Alessandra will speak to this more, but the truth is that, like, it really never ends. When you decide to be someone who steps into their power and has power that is not rooted in the spaces that sort of political players normally generate their power from and really feel their bases, when you're different from that, there is an ungodly, unspeakable amount of pain and strife and difficulty that you encounter on a regular basis, and to a point that can at times be really isolating. And it's another reason why I'm grateful for organizations like Run for Something, because I think it creates a network of people who know what it's like to go against the grain and know how difficult that is, and gives you a sense of community, and also gives you the courage to keep doing what you're doing, and gives you the ability to keep fighting the fight knowing that you're not alone. Because the mean tweets come, the posts come, but it's also, again, the calls to people and the reasons in the ways that you can't figure out why things are not materializing. And so even now, having gone through all of that, running against someone who is proven to be corrupt, still encountering some of those invisible levers working against you. And it's tremendously frustrating, but I take a lot of comfort in knowing that I have groups and the people. I keep calling Run for Something a group, but really what the magic of Run for Something is the people that make it up. And so having people like that on your side is really comforting, and I'm really grateful. So thank you.
Thank you, Amanda. I am so excited for you to officially win in November and take the seat that you rightfully deserve. Our last speaker for tonight is State Senator Alessandra Biaggi. She comes to us from the Bronx/Westchester. She is the chair of the newly revived Ethics and Internal Governance Committee, the granddaughter of Italian immigrants who lived in Hunts Point. She is the 4th generation of her family to live in District 34. Before launching her campaign, Alessandra served in Governor Andrew Cuomo's counsel's office, focusing on New York State's women's policy agenda, advocating for the Reproductive Health Act and the Comprehensive Contraceptive Coverage Act. During the 2016 election, Alessandra and I were co-workers she was the Deputy National Operations Director for Hillary's campaign. She is a feisty motherfucker, and I say that in the best possible way. I am so glad to have her with us tonight. Alessandra, take it away.
Thank you so much, Amanda. That is a high amount of praise from someone that I frankly adore so much. So thank you for that. Thank you for having me tonight, and to all of you who are joining us, thank you for being here. I've said this when I ran in 2018, and I say it all the time. Everyone thinks about the federal government because you turn on the TV, MSNBC, CNN, you hear about Congress and the president. But what is lost is the fact that the decisions that affect us the most are made by our state governments. Everything that we experience on a day-to-day basis is because of a decision that somebody who was elected for the state assembly or the state senate decided inside of a chamber behind closed doors that a lot of people really don't ever even wonder about, because it really, I would say until 2016, wasn't really sexy. And one of the reasons why I love Run for Something, and I say this every time I speak for any one of the events, is that I would not be here if it were not for Run for Something. And I do not say that lightly or give that as an accolade out to just about anybody. In 2018, when I decided to run for this seat, the person I ran against was really like at the top of the corrupt triangle, okay? When we talk about machines and political machines, this was a person who was basically running the Bronx machine, okay? Had the governor's ear, had donors' ears and so much strength that there were threats that were made to me and others who supported me. And frankly, it was a very scary street fight. That's the best way to describe the race. But here's the thing, and I remind myself of this when I'm in these legislative fights. When you stand for something and you really believe that you're standing for the right thing, the ethical thing, the moral thing, which is beginning to become more of the norm in our state governments. We are seeing people who are just very much angry at the way things have happened, especially in places like the Bronx, which we know from COVID-19, the epicenter of the epicenter, highest deaths, highest infection rates. That's not an accident. That's because of years of underinvestment in places that have needed the help and support of their governments. And so in 2018, when I stood for this seat and really took a stand for it, the number of people who told me that I was insane, that it wasn't my turn, to the same thing that Judge Best has mentioned. It's not your turn, get in line, we're not gonna support you, you're crazy. My favorite line was, you'll never have any type of job in politics, as if that was like a threat, like I should, in state government, like I should, be so upset about that. But you see, the point I'm trying to make is this: anytime that you're onto something or you're onto them, somebody will tell you you're crazy, or somebody will tell you to sit down, or don't be so emotional about that, or just lower your voice a little bit. Anytime that happens, you know that you're onto the right thing and you're in the right fight. And I got that every single day. And, when all was said and done and we won in September of 2018, it was one of the most amazing moments of my life, but it wasn't a given, right? I ran against someone who had a $3 million war chest. We spent $250,000, but we beat him by 10 points. Why? Because in the very beginning of my race, okay, when people told me I was crazy and didn't want to take me seriously, didn't want to donate because they didn't want their names to show up on the donor, public donor list because they were a fear of political retribution, Run for Something stood with me. And, when you're trying to raise money and you're trying to get your name out there and be taken seriously, having an organization like Run for Something, which is not just about the, stamp of, okay, you have an endorsement, see you later. It's about the support. It's about the strategy. It's about thinking about campaigns in a way that's modern, that's future oriented. Karen mentioned, or Judge Best mentioned earlier, about how she really pivoted the way that she handled her election. And she was really a lot on social media and had her message out there, put the letter with the door knockers. I mean, these are different ways of campaigning. And these are ideas and strategies that Run for Something not only continues to evolve and make possible, but is constantly thinking about what's the next edge? How do you get the next inch? And frankly, when you're in that fire, it's really hard to think about the big picture. And so having organizations like Run for Something behind me in the beginning and throughout, and again for my reelection, has just been invaluable. And I will never forget that, ever. And, to the point that Amanda Septimo, who is going to be my future colleague, I can guarantee it. And I will just say that in 2018, after I won the primary, my predecessor was also on the independent party line. And it was a very stressful feeling because I had everyone in the machine pushing for him and for people to vote for him on the independence line. And it was very stressful. After going through a fire race like that, coming out and winning, and then having someone be on the line again, it's like you're now in a second battle. It's hard. But here's the thing. The wind is with us, and the moment is with us. And this is a presidential election, and a majority of the voters in the Bronx are Democrats. And so they're going to be voting D down the line, if not WFP. And the point and the reason I say that is because the tricks of the machine are dying. And they're dying, and they're falling, and they're cracking, and they're breaking because of the coalitions that are being built on the ground. It is about every conversation that then multiplies to inspire hope and trust and optimism. When I used to knock on doors in 2018, I obviously can't knock on doors now, unfortunately, but in 2018, when I knocked on doors, I would say to myself every time before I knocked on the door, and I would also say to my team and all of our volunteers, nobody wants you to knock on their door at 6:30 at night and ruin their dinner. Right? You better not knock on the door, have them open it, and then be like saying things that are going to make them feel like the parade of horribles is going to happen. You need to breathe life into people. And this group of candidates that are running, and the people that Run for Something has supported, are people who are not only morally rooted, but who are seeing the possibility of what government can provide, whether it's the legislative branch, the judicial branch, whether it's local, hyper-local, town, county, whatever it might be. This is where it's happening. And I can just say that, even after my win in 2018 in the general, you get to Albany, you go there, you pass all these amazing bills, the games still ensue. They happen all of the time. And all I'll say is this, what I have reminded myself of every single day is to put my head down, to work incredibly hard, because a lot of people don't read the bill, so that's an edge on people. And that's like a very silly thing, but it's true. And to be focused on what is possible, because the old ways of doing politics are not working. And we are quite literally transforming our governments in real time in a way that I don't even think the most cynical of cynics thought was possible. But when we have not only said we were going to do something, but then came back to say, hey, how's it going? Or showing up in communities that really people didn't come to listen to because they weren't the campaign contributions that the elected officials needed. That's not what it's about. That is not what public service is about. And so in this process of running for something, winning, you're constantly running for something even after you win, which is really like the catch-22 of all of this. This fight that you learn about because of organizations like Run for Something and the right ways of going about strategy, you bring that into the room with you when you're fighting for those bills. And you because every bill is a campaign in and of itself. And you have to organize, and you have to have online support, and you have to have support amongst your colleagues, and you got to work with people you might not like very much. You might not like at all, actually, and get them to get behind the issue, because the grand scheme of things is much bigger than all of us. And so I'm here to really not only re-emphasize the importance of our state governments, but also just to re-emphasize the importance of organizations like Run for Something that has not only said after 2016 that we're going to help candidates, but has remained committed and has really transformed this space in a way that I think is incredibly special. It's incredibly unique. It is not easy to keep up the pace at which campaigns run, especially how they're doing it, which is across the country. That is just an enormous amount of responsibility, and the number of wins as a result of their support is just proving that those of us on the right side of history, at the end of the day, at the end of the road, we are going to win. We are. It might take us a little bit longer, but we're going to get there. And so I'm grateful. I look forward to continuing the good work in Albany and making sure that we are making more and more progress and not letting anyone get away with that under the table backroom deal kind of thing. Anytime it happens, I'll be the first one to call it out. It doesn't necessarily mean I have the most friends in Albany, but I'm not there to make friends. I'm there to make change. And so at the end of the day, that is what we have to focus on. And the fact that I know that if something were to blow up or go wrong, I could turn to run for something and actually ask in the middle of a legislative session, what do I do? To me, that's the most invaluable thing you can have as a candidate, as an elected, and as a woman who is inside of a government that has predominantly been filled with much older men. And so we're changing even that dynamic. So I'm very grateful. I look forward to Amanda joining me in Albany, Septimo, and I look forward also to seeing along the way and on the campaign route Judge Best, because your story is incredibly inspirational, and I'm so glad that so many people got to hear about it.
Amazing. I feel so fired up as always. We're going to bring all of our speakers up onto the screen, I believe, and got a couple questions for you. Let's see what's floating around in here. I want to throw a hot one out there just to like get us started. I know Judge Best, you can't answer this because of your a judicial candidate, but Alessandra or Amanda, do you guys have thoughts on our mayor, Bill de Blasio?
No, I don't. I do have thoughts on the 2021 race. Alessandra and I actually just saw each other yesterday. We were both at an endorsement event for Scott Stringer. I think that we've still got a whole nother year of a mayor, and we're already making endorsements for the next one, which I think says everything that it needs to about how we feel about how things are going right now. I just think that I feel disappointed. I think disappointed is probably the only thing that I have to say. When the mayor ran on the platform of, ending the Tale of Two Cities and what have you, that really spoke to neighborhoods like mine. I'm from Hunts Point. Alessandra and I will hopefully overlap as colleagues in the Hunts Point area. And it just didn't happen that way. And so I'm disappointed, and I hope that we have leadership that is transformational and really thinking about the way that policy impacts last for decades, and how decisions that are made today will hurt or help people for 40 and 50 years to come. And I think that Scott Stringer has that, and I'm looking forward to supporting him.
I will say ditto to everything that Amanda said, and just about, the current mayor. I think the part that is the most disappointing for me is that this was someone who ran as like the most progressive leader in the country. I mean, he was using the word progressive before it was a thing, right? People were saying it, but it wasn't really something that everyone was aspiring to be and to become. And so the fact that, listen, I represent the Bronx and Westchester, but a majority of my district is in the Bronx, okay? In the tenure of this mayor, we have not seen an increase in affordable housing. We have not seen a decrease in asthma rates. We have not seen a decrease in homelessness. In fact, I'm gonna use a hyper-local issue that really drives me crazy. When I go to places like Manhattan or Brooklyn or wherever, you can walk down a street and see a garbage can, and then you see a recycling bin, and that's pretty normal. You can walk down the street anywhere in the Bronx, can't find a garbage can. If you find one, it's overflowing. Can't find a recycling bin. Everything is old. I mean, it is so outrageous. And so, if you're listening and you're thinking, well, you represent the Bronx, can't you do something about it? I have banged the drum and will continue to, because even, from small things like garbage cans to big things like air quality, how they're handled shows how whether or not people care about the people who live there. It's about integrity. And when you say something, do you follow through? And I just haven't seen that with this mayor. And I could probably list a whole bunch of other examples, but it's less about being angry and more about like, look at how much power and possibility you have to transform a city into becoming even better. And it's a real loss. And, our generation is suffering because of it. So
my only add here is that Bill de Blasio is proof that it really does matter which Democrat. It is not just any Democrat, it is which Democrat. Also, he's a spineless coward. We have a bunch of really good questions in here. I want to get to one that I know came up a bunch as one of the reasons why these conversations came about, of how do folks in positions like you all affect police budgets and overseeing the law enforcement roles here. So I'll sort of toss it out to whoever wants to jump in first.
I'm happy to jump in first. So I will just talk about the breakdown. So NYPD budget is underneath the city government, so the city council predominantly votes on how to fund the police. The NYPD, their budget is $6 billion, as I'm sure many of you already know just from reading about this entire political season and in the moment that we are in. However, it doesn't mean that the state legislature has no sway or say or cannot, push the political tide to pressure the sitting electeds in the city council to do the right thing, and a lot of us did that. At the state level too, the state budget, which is a $173 billion budget. It's one of the largest budgets in the world. One of the largest economies in the world is the state of New York. In fact, it's larger than a lot of small countries. We also fund the state troopers and other law enforcement organizations, thinking about, the way in which we do that and how much money we put towards these organizations and these agencies is something that we have really been taking, I think, probably more seriously than ever before. And so when it comes to policing, when it comes to, defunding the police, which, I think unfortunately has been lost as in terms of what it means on a lot of people, which is an unfortunate thing. Police officers and law enforcement have no real right to be dealing with mental health crises. They're not equipped to do it. And so there's reasons why we want to reduce the budget of the NYPD and perhaps, put that money towards social services or towards solving the homelessness crisis. The fact that a city as rich as New York has that crisis is unacceptable. And so, there's a lot we can do. Our policies absolutely matter. The way that we deal with transparency, the repeal of 50A this year, which means that we can actually, as everyday citizens, make sure that we understand who inside of law enforcement has a police misconduct record. The fact that we couldn't see that before is almost mind-boggling, but 50A, the repeal of 50A means now we can get access to that information. There's so much more we can do. We can make sure that we get rid of tear gas, which is not allowed on battlefields in combat and war, okay? But we allow it for our police departments. Demilitarizing the police, banning rubber bullets, which can kill people. I mean, the list goes on. There's so much more to still do. And I hope that the pressure inside remains amongst my colleagues, but also the pressure on the outside remains too. Because I'll tell you this, the one thing I saw that moved a lot of my colleagues when it came to policing was the public pressure. It scared them, and that's a good thing. And I want you all to know that even when you make a call or tweet something, it works.
I'm just going to +1 all of that.
Amazing. Similarly, got a couple people asking, what the fuck is up with the trash? Why don't we have better trash education? Why is there so much trash on the streets? Why can't the city support composting? Anyone want to jump in there?
Trash is a social justice issue. And I don't know how many folks are familiar with the Young Lords of the South Bronx, but their entire movement started because there wasn't enough trash collection. And I really love Alessandra's point that when you look at these services, it really speaks to your values and the value that you place on those communities and the people in those communities. Trash is an equity issue and it needs to be talked about and thought about that way. And right now the city doesn't. What happens, one of the things that leads to a lot of the inequities that we see around trash. So of course there's sanitation and all of that stuff. The city has recently decided to shift to kind of a zoned collection. We haven't gotten there because the pandemic has kind of backed that up, and that comes with its own set of controversies, but we do hope that it'll at least help move the needle in some of our environmental justice communities around air quality and things like that. But the real inequities when you think about trash are connected to business improvement districts and other kind of community groups that really support a lot of the sanitation efforts around the city. So I was actually amazed to learn. So what's normal for us is trash pickup like 3 times a week. I was amazed to learn that in Times Square, trash gets picked up like 3 times a day. And that sounds like Beverly Hills of trash to me. And I can't imagine how that inequity is allowed to exist when, so Times Square, obviously, as one might guess, is the #1 place in terms of the subway that gets used. It gets the highest number of people. The #2 in the city is in our district. It's 3rd Avenue, 149th Street, the hub, sees the #2 most amount of people in the entire city every single day. We still only get trash collection 3 times a week. And so the bid, our business improvement district, ends up picking up some of that slack, but business improvement districts are funded through property owners in that area deciding to put their money into a pot, and they have to choose to join it, right? And choose to pay for these beefed up services. And you literally have inequities baked into structure, right? When you're saying you have to have extra money to put into these services that are meant to be publicly run. And so what's up with trash is that it's a social justice issue and it's not treated as one. And I think we have so many fundamentally broken systems like education, like homelessness, like housing, that we forget that these quality of life issues are just as important to people's everyday lived experience. And trash comes with, it's not just this luxury, like I don't want to look or smell at trash or smell trash, which I don't, but it's like it brings rats, which invite asthma, it's just a kind of trickle down effect. And I'm really passionate about trash, so thanks for asking me about it.
If I could just add one thing, because I am passionate about trash too, Amanda, so I hope that we get to work on this together, because I am quite frankly obsessed with this. This in combination with trees, okay? Just as a point to make, even though this question wasn't asked, I want everyone to just be aware when you're walking down the street, if you do get to do that, look at, if you change boroughs, how many trees are in Manhattan if they're lining the streets. And then if you change boroughs and you go to the Bronx, certain areas like Riverdale, trees everywhere. It's amazing. The air feels like you can, it's like crisp and you can breathe it in. And then you go a little bit more south and there's not as many trees. And then you go all the way south and there really aren't trees at all. And the air is much more dirty. That is not by accident. Right? These things are so interconnected, and this is something that I am continuing to work on. So I'm glad that this issue was brought up, because all of these things are just a circle that connect in a way that make and keep people sick and keep communities down. And it really is, I hope, the end of that, because more and more people are becoming aware of who's in charge of what, and how to fix it and change it, and then how to actually hold accountable those who say they will.
A little bit of change of topics here. A couple people have asked how COVID has changed interacting with their constituents or your campaign process, and whether you think how you've adjusted your communication style accordingly. Karen, you want to go first on this one?
Yes, like I previously stated, the one thing that I did do when people were like outside, whether they were taking out the trash or, on the lawn with their kids, I did request, I said, do you mind or may I approach you? Because some people don't want anyone coming near them. When I stood at the polls, the entire early voting week and for the election day, some people freaked out when we approached them. So the first thing I would say is ask permission, because that shows respect for the person's space and for their health. And if they tell you no, just back away or say, can I leave this here and then you can pick it up, because I really want you to have this information because it's important, because if you're planning on voting. And they'll say yes or they'll say no, but walk away, because you don't want to leave a bad taste in their mouth. So when they do go to the polls, you don't want them saying, well, this person I'm definitely not voting for. I will say a lot of people, my competitors, and I know people who are running for other positions, they were using mailers. And it got to the point where I was getting all of them and I was just taking them from my mailbox and throwing them in the trash. So you have to kind of figure out what everyone else is doing and try to do that, but also be a little different. Kind of like when I said, I attached a letter to the palm card and I put it under people's doors. So they were able, especially in the morning when they wake up to go to work or, go to get their mail, that's the first thing that they see when they open the door, and they're like, oh, what's this? The one thing I kind of stole from Jabal Bowman's camp is chalking. So it was hard to stand at the train stations this year because people don't want to take things from other people because of COVID. So what I did was I wrote my name at the top, and at the bottom when people were walking towards it, it said like change, progression, fairness, and then and then arrows, and then when they got to my name, it was vote for Karen Best, or it would have my website at the top. So, or it would be on the street when they're driving away from the train. So when they're looking down on the street, they're like, oh wow, I've never seen this before. So finding new ways to impress people so they'll remember your name and they'll remember your campaign, and then they'll vote for you.
That I think there's, and I've like popped in and I saw that people are asking how will campaigning change forever. I think this time, like Karen mentioned, you just had to come up with ways to be creative and reach people. My district is entirely within the 15th congressional district, which had a really, really competitive primary this cycle. And people were completely exasperated by the amount of incoming information. I think there were 11 candidates in the congressional race. So they were just being inundated with like door knocks. People were still door knocking, which I won't name any names, but door knocks, with calls, with texts, with all sorts of things. And so we actually, and you know, it's sad to say, but at some point we had come to terms with the fact that this might not have been the year that we got it done, because so much of our communication was focused on getting people the things that they needed. Food insecurity was a major issue at the start of the pandemic, and it's since been worked out because we've seen a lot of emergency food programs pop up. But at the start, people were really struggling with how to make ends meet in every respect. And so it felt insensitive and irresponsible to be talking about something that I know is majorly consequential, but that just doesn't compare when you're thinking about how to feed your kids, you know? And so we decided to just help people in the ways that we could. And that meant filling a lot of the gaps. I picked up like medicine for like voters, or I don't want to call them constituents yet, but for voters and for people that I'd never met, like doing those kinds of things to help people bridge those gaps. But it meant, you know, not being able to necessarily always talk about the campaign in a way that didn't feel overly transactional. And maybe it's something I've just got to get over, but it just wasn't where I was yet. And so I think the biggest change was reacting to meet the need in the moment. I think campaigns are naturally focused in this like me to you arrow, and then maybe receiving feedback. But I think COVID really shifted us to a space where it's like, you lead with what you need, and I'll figure out how to meet that need. And hopefully somewhere in there we get to talk about politics. But I think long-term, I can't imagine how campaigns now function without running a texting program, without focusing on digital advertising, even when you can go back to door knocking. I think it's changed people's habits. It's changed what people look for now. And so I'm excited for new, expanded, normalized ways to reach voters.
We have so many good questions. I want to do one more issue specific one before we close out. So we might go just a few minutes over. Got a bunch of questions here about the COVID budget crisis and its ability to affect change. I want to focus it specifically on transit, both on the subway and on the car situation in the city. Alessandra or Amanda, can either of you speak to that?
Yes. So let's just also begin with a framing, which is that some of us in March, when we passed the budget in the state of New York, foresaw that the already existing deficit of $6.1 billion would only increase because of the crisis that we were in, and that we needed to raise revenue. That was a call that was not heeded. It still has not been heeded, and that is a separate but related issue, because we have not raised revenue in the state of New York for a very long time, at least a decade, because we have austerity budgets, which really are just budgets that are meeting the need, but barely even meeting the need for the entire state of New York. Okay, when it comes to transportation, one of the things that I have seen that I find to be positive, but then also I think it's being used as now a negative, unfortunately, is that in the beginning we saw, oh, we're going to be cleaning the subway cars every night. Now we're going to clean them every few days. We're going to disinfect them. It probably was the only time in the history of New York City that these subway cars were disinfected, and that's a great thing. However, now what we're seeing is that there really isn't this restoration of service to this 24/7 service. And what that really means in terms of impact is that workers who have night shifts, or essential workers who work in very far places from the boroughs that they live in really cannot get home. And so what we are seeing is that the MTA is saying, well, we still need to use these nights to clean, the subways. Okay, but what I fear it will be used as will be a way to make service cuts because of the budget deficit that we have. And I just want to make one more reminder about just our transportation system in general in the state of New York. The MTA is an agency that is under the sole power of our executive branch, the governor of the state of New York. There is no question about it. That is the authority. That's the authority. And so anytime you hear anything, whether it's social media, on the news, about there's nothing that our governor can do, it's not true. Okay, so that's one part of it. I wanted to say on the other piece of it, for the budget equity piece, there are many ways that we can raise revenue to be able to have a fully functioning transit system, which the city of New York deserves, needs to be updated desperately. A lot of the switch lines and the cars are very, very old. They are beyond use. And the fact that we're still functioning and are using them is dangerous in many instances. Making sure that our bus fleets are actually clean energy. There's so many different things. Bike lanes, okay? In the Bronx, the resistance for bike lanes is unbelievable, but it's also important to be able to transform the borough. So there's so many things we can do, but until we actually get serious about where our money is coming from and how we close that gap, not only will we not meet our most basic needs, right? Like funding our schools, fire, police, the things we know must function every day, picking up garbage, but we will absolutely not be able to think about recovery because we won't have the means to do it. The final thing I'll say, in every other fiscal crisis in the state of New York, whether it has been a Democratic or a Republican governor of the state of New York, revenue has been raised. It didn't matter who was in charge. The wealthiest amongst us paid a little bit more for a small period of time, and we were able to actually get our city and state back on track. That is what we must do, in addition to other things, but in order to be able to not have our city and state collapse. So it's not a parade of horribles. There is always hope and promise, but we've got to get real about where we are. And I think a lot of what is preventing us from making progress is that a lot of our leaders are not rooted to reality.
I hate to sound like a broken record, but I also think that transit is an equity issue. So before the pandemic, the proposal that I was most excited about was a free MTA proposal that we had put forth, and we'd spend a lot of time researching. And it's really predicated on the idea that the subway is public infrastructure that every single person in this city benefits from, including people who have businesses here. I don't know how many people were living in the city for the subway strike of 2005, but just for a couple of days, transit workers stepped out and our city was at an absolute standstill. And I think it really, really, really drove home the point that without the subway, no one functions, right? And that goes for Morgan Stanley, for whoever. Just because you can afford an Uber for every employee or a car doesn't mean that there's space. And this public infrastructure needs to be maintained by everyone, right? Because if it's something that's become a business, something that's critical to running your business, then you should also be meaningfully contributing to it. And New York City residents already pay so much by way of quality of life to support the subway. Specifically, I'm sure everyone has looked at apartment listings before. You will not see an apartment listing that doesn't list what subways are nearby. And so again, driving home the point that we pay for this in higher rents. We pay for it when I live near Yankee Stadium and I have to let 5 subways go if I want to get home on a Yankee game, right? And Yankees play 10 months out of the year. So these are all the reasons why we were pushing for a free MTA. And then to Alessandra's point about workers, there's plenty data that says the poorer you are, the further you live from work. And so quality of life issue, because it's less time you spend with your kids. And again, these issues multiply. We know that kids in low-income communities hear 1 million less words than their white, wealthier counterparts by the time they're 3. Layered issues, right? And so in the end, transit's an equity issue. And I actually was really concerned that we were moving really far away from a free MTA, because I think budget realities have made it so that finding an extra $4 billion, just to put in kind of perspective, the MTA takes in $4 billion at the fare box, and I'm only suggesting free MTA for New York City residents. So it's not even a full $4 billion hole, but we'll just call it $4 billion for the sake of argument. I think we're in a world where it's difficult to get all the way to $4 billion when we're missing a few other billion. But just during this pandemic, we also saw the impact that free buses made, right? We didn't even have free trains, but free buses alone got people moving so much more. And there's an entire social justice narrative about the freedom of movement and the ability to get from A to B and reach opportunities in other places. And then I just read an article yesterday or maybe today, all these days are a blur, that talked about how once they reinstated fares on buses, we saw usage drop immediately by 22%. And so I think it, again, highlights the fact that for whatever reason, we're working to develop a transit system that connects our city and that brings people to other places, that furthers commerce, that grows our economy. But the way we're doing it is acting as a barrier. We're leaving people out when 22% of people that were on the bus yesterday are not on it today. And when you're seeing really selective enforcement of fare evasion in neighborhoods like mine and not other parts of the city. And those, I think, are the larger conversations that I hope that this moment has pushed us to have. Again, it's not going to be easy to fill a $4 billion hole, and there's probably not the appetite, but I will be the warrior that is always saying when we're looking at equity, when we're looking at social justice, and we're looking at things through a true equity lens, because equity doesn't mean everybody gets cut 20% across the board. Equity means who can afford a 20% cut, who needs to take a 50% cut, and where are the places that we actually need to be restoring resources. That's what true equity means. And I'm excited to make sure that conversation is at the center of this recovery process, like Alessandra said, as much as I can.
I could talk about how cities should center people, not cars, for hours. Thank you guys so much for doing this. There are so many good questions that we don't have time to get to. So I want to end this on an action-oriented note. Amanda, Karen, Alessandra, what's one thing people can do to help you right now? Amanda, you want to start with us?
I just made a joke about always being muted. Sure. It is, I think right now, you'll see opportunities to phone bank with us, to text bank with us. And we're always fundraising. But really we're always hosting events, and we're really in this creative space where we're coming up with new things to do all the time. So just be in touch. If you're interested in supporting the campaign, be in touch and we'll pull you into cool events. We're doing like bingo with seniors to celebrate National Grandparents' Day. Always having a good time, so we'd love to have you.
Quickly, you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and you will notice in the next few days that I am going to create something called like a fall weeks of action. So for the next remaining weeks that we have left until the general election, I'm going to be hosting phone banks so that we can make sure not only that we really preserve the majority that we have in the state Senate, which is very important, and we want to continue it because we want to keep the progress up, but we want a super majority, which means 3 more seats. We've got to get it for so many reasons, but if no other reason motivates us to be able to override a governor's veto. Okay, so let's get it going. You will see that come up. Please sign up. It would be amazing. The state of New York, even though we're now finally blue, we're always just one election away from becoming purple again. And so we've got to always take it seriously, be vigilant, and I would appreciate any help we can always have. Thank you.
And if you're looking for New York State Senate candidates to support, I know we have at least 2 off the top of my head that are trying to flip seats. So we'll drop links to that in the chat as well. Karen, how can people help you?
I'm assuming everyone here is in New York City. So, you know, most people look at Yonkers as upstate like I did because I'm from Queens. I'm not allowed, as a judicial candidate, I'm not allowed to ask for donations, but I will say that I funded the majority of my campaign. 3 of my challenges in the primary altogether, because they ran together, they spent, from what I heard, $250,000, so $250,000. I spent less than $20,000. So, you know, and I will say this, one of the candidates who lost the primary, in the Democratic primary, he's running as a Republican now. So he is still a threat. If anyone would like to get in contact with me, my website is super easy. My last name, Best, for BEST, the number 4, YonkersCityCourt.com. If you want a phone bank, if you want to hang out at the polls for me for early voting, the general election, phone banking, anything you want, just reach out, please. I'd appreciate it.
And if you are fired up about what Run for Something is doing, we welcome your contributions again. I know folks gave tonight, but runforsomething.net/build is the place to go to give and allow us to stay here and be a part of these amazing campaigns in 2020, 2021, to really blow up some stuff in 2021, 2022 in the city and the state, because it has never been more important. Thank you guys so much for joining us this evening. You all, these three amazing women. Thank you to our host committee, and thank you to all of our guests tonight. I could talk about New York City politics for just hours, so thank you for giving us this chance. As always, reach out to us, find us on all of the social media platforms. You can always shoot us an email, hello@runforsomething.net, and we'll follow up with an email tomorrow with links to all of this information as well, so you'll have it in your inbox to find. Thank you, everybody. Have a good night.